Ba-ba-da-la-ba-ba-ba. Welcome to episode 3 of Medlin Around. That's Medlin with one D like a medley. I am your host, Noah Sunday-Lefkowitz, and if you're wondering why I sung the intro and did not play it on piano, it's because today is a very special episode with a very special guest, and my piano is not plugged in. We're going to have many special guests on this podcast, but today is the first, and we are going to be talking with Haunted Mansion connoisseur Brandon Hardy. Brandon Hardy is an incredibly skilled craftsman, illusion maker, prop builder, sculptor, painter, puppet builder, puppeteer. He has worked on over 34 Broadway shows in various capacities. He has an incredible Patreon where he offers in-depth Halloween how-tos for your own benefit to create illusions, special effects, decor, and all manner of Haunted Mansion-themed goodness. And that is what we were talking about today. We are talking about the Haunted Mansion and why the Haunted Mansion works. A lot of people talk about how it works. We are not talking about that. We are talking about why it works and why it has sustained such popularity over the course of over 50 years. Brandon is amazing. You should follow him on all platforms at brandon.hardy.art. You may know him from his viral chicken wire ghost videos. You may know him from his elaborate Halloween setup that he does at his house every year. You may know him from the abridged version of his Halloween how-tos that he offers for free on social media, that he offers full length on his Patreon. You may know him as the guy who makes a lot of Audrey 2 puppets that are elaborate, and you may know him from his love of the Haunted Mansion. So without further ado, here is the third of 3 free episodes of this podcast. After this, all other episodes will be exclusively available on my Patreon, so if you're not a member of that, go become a member. Thank you so much. Let's talk about the Haunted Mansion and why it works. Brandon.
Yes.
You like the Haunted Mansion, right?
You know, I do like the Haunted Mansion.
He says, sitting in his Haunted Mansion-themed room.
Well, technically I'm reclining right now.
Oh, okay. Full disclosure, we want to talk about why the Haunted Mansion works, and we tried to record this once, and it didn't really come together. And so we made a list of 5 reasons why we think the Haunted Mansion works. And we came back a week or 2 later to record the podcast episode again. And neither of us can find the list of the 5 things.
It's funny because we weren't like making a list.
No, we didn't. We didn't set
it.
out to make the list. It just
No.
eventually got
We
to
hit on
5
5 things where it was like, these really kind of sum it up. And we both like took notes. We wrote things down, and somehow between the two of us, we for all the things we wrote, we don't have the 5.
So this re-recording was an attempt to summarize what we eventually came to the conclusion of last time. And yet, we don't have that list. So I guess we're just going to go through the exact same process and hope that we do it in a more entertaining way than the first time.
We did kind of just stumble upon these things last time. So there's a very good chance that as we continue down this very same road, we may hit the same things once again.
So one of them, so we're talking about why the Haunted Mansion works. The Haunted Mansion is your favorite attraction. The Haunted Mansion is my favorite attraction.
We both believe the Haunted Mansion works, right? Seems like, because just because it's our favorite doesn't mean it's good.
Sure, there's a level of objectivity that we need to have to say that I believe that the Haunted Mansion is one of the most successful experiences created by Imagineering. I would stand by that phrase, would you not?
I would. In fact, I would so much that last time, I believe we started with you asking me if I thought the Haunted Mansion was good.
Yeah, you guys really should have heard the first one. It was great.
You guys, it was so good. Like, I actually, Noah, why aren't you releasing that? Like, what was it that stood between?
I may have since then and now deleted it.
Oh, great.
Which is not the reason we're re-recording it, but is
you
just...
had such confidence that we were just going to nail it on the second try.
I did.
It was like, I don't need this.
And so far, we've only talked about talking about it. The one thing that I remember, because this is one of the points that I always bring up about the Haunted Mansion and why I think it is so successful, is its environmental storytelling. The Haunted Mansion is not it's not a plot-driven attraction, sort of similar to Pirates. It is...
Blessedly.
Right, yes. We especially now in the more present time, we seem to be traveling down the path of very plot-driven attractions, which is not inherently a positive or a negative, but Pirates and Mansion almost uniquely are a much more ambient environmental experience where it is not about a singular plot, but about the vibes. It's about how the space makes you feel.
I would throw in a third alongside Pirates and Mansion as I mean there are certainly a number of environment driven attractions. But there's a third one that I think kind of sits up in the pantheon with those two. Um, which is It's a Small World
I was
in a
thinking about
very
that
different way.
today. I was
Mhm.
thinking about how Small World doesn't necessarily have a single story, but it has a single thesis that we go through and we end up presenting that. I think that's interesting. I
That's
would
true.
agree with you. I would argue that the Haunted Mansion is not dialogue driven enough to need translation, which sort of goes along with the environment thing. Like
That's true.
we have the ghost
It
host who
used to be.
obviously very much sets the scene, but I would argue that even if you did not understand what the ghost host was saying, you would still get a very elevated experience just from the tone. And I would say that that happens in France. I have not ridden
Yes.
I have not ridden
Oh,
sadly
poor
Phantom
baby.
Manor,
That is
but
so sad.
I know that pre-update it was pretty French. And I've watched videos and I've seen that. That seems fun. Doesn't seem to detract from the experience because I get it. It's spooky. I'm getting the vibe from the tone of the actor. I would actually argue that Phantom Manor is even a bit more linear storytelling than
Strangely, yes.
The
Despite having
mansions.
less narration.
Right. Because there is sort of, a main character or two that you follow. In
Mhm.
the Florida and California mansions, that unease that you feel is sort of because you are left a bit more to your own devices. You are not
Right.
being handheld through a linear story. You are the main character and I was going to say trespassing. You are you are
He does say welcome.
well, yes, I guess
I guess it's not trespassing if you've been welcomed in, right?
yeah, I guess he's guiding you along. It's the opposite of trespassing. But as you explore this house, you are things are happening to and around you in a
Mhm.
way that you are left to come to your own conclusions about what the story is and what to take from it. And I think that that's one of the strengths of the mansion that what like we said before, few experiences have. I think people are drawn to the freedom of the mansion that clearly there are so many fan theories and different interpretations of characters even with different versions of fan names.
Mhm.
Some of them have even gone from fan names to real names. Uh,
Right.
from fan to official. The Hitchhiking Ghosts are officially Ezra, Gus, and Phineas,
Goodness.
according to Imagineering now. But I think that the freedom to interpret the mansion lends itself so much to rewriting. Wouldn't you like
Yes.
it lends itself to being a fresh experience every time because depending on if if you're the only person in the stretching room, that's a far different experience
Right.
than if you're there, 3:30 in the afternoon. It's yeah, and wait, this is so weird. I've recorded all of my episodes alone so far. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the episodes that I've heard so far sound fantastic.
Wow.
So don't worry about that.
This
Um,
episode is brought to you by the previous episodes. Thank you very much for
well,
listening.
I thought you were going to
Anyway,
say by me as like, promoting.
this is brought to you by me. If you're listening to this, you've done all you need to do. Thank you.
Incredible.
What do you think about that lack of linear storytelling in the mansion? Why do you think that that is a strength of it? Why do you think that that lends itself to rewritability or varied conclusions?
I think part of what works, in my opinion, about that is that it gives each writer the opportunity to sort of be the writer of the writer of the attraction, where you get to decide, looking down into the ballroom, do some of those characters have names? At this stage, it seems that some of them do. Pickwick had a name from way, way back in the day, but you would never know. You would never get that information just from riding the ride. So it gave you the opportunity as you went through to sort of make your own sense of what you were seeing and decide for yourself, why is that character swinging from the chandelier, or why is that character playing the organ, or what's that, that one woman is blowing out the candles on the cake at the table, okay, presumably it's her birthday. There's enough, there's so many pieces of information and yet so little dictated connective
Yes.
tissue
Well, it's
that, like,
very sorry, you continue, please.
no, no, no,
Don't
no, no, it's okay. Just
I was gonna say it feels very akin to the thing that Pixar didn't invent this, but I remember hearing it a lot in the OG Pixar days of you don't give the audience four, you give the audience two plus two, you let them come up
yep.
with four themselves. The Mansion seems like it presents a lot of pieces of information, pieces of story, and lets you come to your own conclusion, which as a result lets the audience feel a sense of ownership in that, it so much so that I think what the quote unquote official story is versus the head canon of people, it almost holds the same amount of weight because you are not presented with this particular story, so it's like, well, anything really could be relevant, and I still have my own head canons of things
Right.
because that's always how I interpreted it, and there's not enough evidence to say that I am wrong.
Right.
I would never claim that my thoughts are the correct thing, but I have a sense of
Sure.
ownership in that. I think that a lot of people feel that way.
Because for the most part, the ride does not tell you explicitly, who these characters are or what exactly is happening. They sort of give you a general idea, and it's a concept that is, I mean, walking through a haunted house, exploring a haunted house is something that everybody has some cultural awareness of,
Yes, haunted
whether
houses are not new.
right. So you come in with a little bit of a cultural cachet of like, I know what I'm in for. I just don't know specifically what I'm in for. But I think one of the great gifts of the Haunted Mansion specifically is that you walk out of there and for all the things you've seen, you still don't know exactly what was going on. You know,
There's a level of mystique around it.
yeah. And I personally, I think a mystery, an unresolved mystery, typically, almost 100% of the time will be more interesting and more engaging than a clear-cut answer.
Well,
And I think
it
actually,
makes the audience lean in. It makes you
yeah,
be a more active participant in your experience, as opposed to riding a storybook ride. You are presented with the beginning, middle, and end, and you are not being asked as much from a brain capacity. And
right.
I think that the Haunted Mansion engages you in a different way. Same thing with Pirates.
Well, and part of what's interesting about the Haunted Mansion in that particular regard is that it does contrast with Pirates in the sense that the Haunted Mansion has an additional element, which is sort of an existential question
Mm,
that Pirates sort of poses, some questions about morality and,
sure.
ideally if you're taking it, the intended way,
If you're really reading it.
yeah, you maybe come out of there with some opinions about how, you know, you live your life by some moral compass, which is interesting because I think one of the things that Curse of the Black Pearl did really right was it put that onus on the main characters, that it gave them the moral question, and by the end of the movie they'd come to a conclusion about it. And I think people miss that. All right, I don't see a lot of people talk about that, at least when they're assessing the leap from the ride to the movie. It's like the movie actually, for all the differences, of course it's inspired by the ride, but like it asks the same moral question, but it does it a little more plainly
Mm.
because it, has to be the thrust of a 2+ hour. Is it more than 2 hours long?
I
It
believe
has to be the thrust.
the first one is just shy of 2 hours. The second one is two and a half, and the third one is 3:15.
Incredible. What a time to be alive when those movies were
Oh
coming out.
my goodness gracious. I want to go back to morality because I think we said, don't we always want to go back to morality?
Well, some of us maybe.
We mentioned that haunted houses are not new, and I think
Mhm.
that that touches on something very universal about the haunted mansion, which is the question of, well, not even the question, the ultimatum of death and
Mhm.
how we deal with death. I think the haunted mansion lures people in by that very ultimately human question, that human fear of death, and how can we escape it? What happens to you after death? And the haunted mansion presents that question of what's going to happen to you, which is scary, and
Mhm.
then the reveal reversal is, hey, it's a party, and that's so relieving as an audience member. But you have to go through that questioning first. You have to go through
Right.
that, and I can't think of a single other attraction that confronts our own mortality. I know that
Right.
it's uniquely the haunt. I know it's uniquely a haunted house thing, but especially in some place like Disneyland that is so much about the celebration of life, this asks something about death, and then ultimately it's a celebration of death at the end too. But we've gone through so much to get there. I think that
Right.
is something so unique that people have longed for any haunted house, and this just does it so effectively.
Right. Well, and that's why I brought up pirates because certainly people, I think, tend to place um, pirates and mansion, you know, on a similar level, and certainly they bring them up together in conversation very frequently. Not just because they're neighbors in New Orleans Square, but because they're sort of neighbors in terms of like a very specific kind of attraction,
They're
even a
neighbors
specific
in
kind of classic
principle.
attraction.
They're
Yes, that's a
they're
great way of
neighbors in
putting it.
principle and somewhat in design.
They're cousins for sure, if not siblings. But I brought up pirates because pirates asks, sort of poses a moral question, but the Haunted Mansion poses an existential question, which is the
Mm.
entire front half of the ride, and perhaps further, depending on your mileage. It presents you with the idea that you may not make it out of here. Like pirates doesn't necessarily, there's some points maybe when you're wandering through the caverns where it's like, hey, what's going on here? Where are we going? Are we safe? Are there pirates, lurking around the corner? And are they, a threat to us? But the Haunted Mansion explicitly threatens you. Like it actually says to you, like, hey, you're not safe here. And then the ghost host walks it back a little bit, and he's
Oh,
like, "Oh no, hold on, I didn't mean to do that so soon." Um,
that was the original line, actually.
well, right,
Oh, I didn't mean to do it so soon. Didn't mean to do it to you.
yeah. And so ultimately, even though he sort of apologizes and takes it back, you still know at that point you're like, I can't completely trust this guy, and he is my guide through this. And I don't necessarily know. I mean, certainly, if you've gone on it before, you might have some idea. But as a first time rider, presumably, one, I don't think you necessarily expect for real that like, oh, I came to Disneyland and I'm gonna die in here. Like they're gonna kill me today at Disneyland. But they do
You didn't sign
suggest
that
that
waiver
it's
when you walked into Disneyland?
well, my handwriting wasn't the best when I was age 5.
I signed it. They didn't notice that I signed it. Ghost M host.
See, so technically he's the one who's in trouble now.
Well, also the ghost host, I would argue, is an unreliable narrator.
Well, that's
Be-
kind of what I mean. Yeah, you
because
don't
he
know.
he
Like, I
does
don't
he
think I can
does
trust this
trick
guy.
you. He does leave you. Like he
Hmm.
does leave you to your own
As soon
devices.
as the other ghosts show up, as soon as you see them, he's like, "All right, I'll see y'all later. You handle it from here." And it's like, but this is like now things are really getting
Now there are
real.
ghosts around, dude.
Yeah, like now I can see them. I don't know if that's better or worse than not being able to see them, but it's certainly an escalation. Like, and so to leave you at that point is, theoretically, I mean, if I were in a house and if I were in an actual haunted house and I was there with a trusted friend and it was the middle of the night and we were wandering around. And then the second a ghost showed up, that friend split. I would not consider them a friend. I would be
No.
like, wait a second, you left me as soon as things really got real. So for him to do that, and like, especially after already sort of, having threatened us and made us question his, integrity as a ghost, um, whether we can trust him or not, and whether we'll be okay, whether we're going to get out of here, that's gutsy, especially because when you're looking down in the ballroom, you still have a bit of a remove from the ghosts. They're a whole level down below you
Right.
or a level above you.
It is a bit of a them going through their lives and you peering
Yeah,
into it. You're not necessarily a part of it the way you eventually become
right.
in the graveyard.
They don't even seem to notice us yet. So we're not at the point where the other ghosts are confronting us, and we don't necessarily know how they feel about us being there. Then, of course, you take a turn into the attic, and depending on which decade you're doing that in,
Hmm.
you start to get a sense that, oh, hey, maybe these ghosts aren't cool with me being here, you
Right,
know?
because well, that's very interesting. That's a very interesting point because the ghost host threatens you in the beginning, and depending on which bride you have experienced, the bride in various stages of concreteness also threatens
Precisely.
you.
Yes.
And that's very interesting. And I think that that's something else that keeps you engaged as a mansion viewer is that the reveal reversal doesn't happen until the very end. You are purposely put on edge for the duration of the experience. You are
Mhm.
not comforted until the third act. And I think
I
that
mean,
that
I feel
is
very warm and fuzzy as soon as I step in the door, but that's only because I know how it's going to go.
right.
Like,
Well, it's that's actually really funny because I this isn't one of the points that I wanted to talk about, but it is fascinating because the Haunted
how do you
Mansion
know we lost the list?
that's so true. I I have this dual experience when I ride the Haunted Mansion of, oh, this is my favorite thing. Oh, I'm
Mhm.
home. I love this. I know this like the back of my hand. And also, I crave to go through the experience with the emotional experience of how I did it the first time. Like I want to
Right.
go in with the trepidation. That's why I love riding it at night when I'm like the only one. Sometimes
Hmm.
I like
It
being
does give you
tricked.
chills in a different way.
I long for that moment where I, as a Haunted Mansion super fan, am still tricked into being put on edge. That doesn't, and it doesn't
Yes.
happen all the time. And that's not my fault. That's not the mansion's fault.
It might be
But
your fault. How many times have you put yourself on that ride? At some point, you
hush,
got to show some restraint.
listen, bub.
I'm not one to talk.
But it's that like, I think I long for those moments where it's like, oh, that still like got
It's
me.
just completely real. Yeah. And truthfully, I think that is one of our points, or it leads to one of our points of why the attraction is so successful. Because when you're young, that is how you experience it. You're like, this is all real. I'm now seeing that ghosts are real. These are completely believable. I am like in a circumstance where I am fearing for my safety and the safety of my immediate family who is here with me at the park. And like that's very, disconcerting, especially as a child, especially in the context of a day at Disney where nothing else is like forcing you to feel that way. Dumbo feels, very safe compared to this. But
Speak
then
for
as you get
yourself.
older, well, I mean, it depends. Listen, not all of us are afraid of heights the way that you are. It's okay. It's all right. As long as you've got the feather.
He's got the
Um,
magic feather.
I thought Timothy Mouse was in the room with us for a second. As you grow up and come back to the haunted mansion, eventually, presumably, for a lot of people, I won't say everybody, you reach a point where you realize, okay, I know I'm safe. I know I'm good. Either just because you've written it enough times and you're like, I got out of here every time I wrote it before, or because you start to question, like, well, are these real ghosts? Do I even believe in ghosts? What really even is happening at a day in Disneyland? But what the Haunted Mansion has that not every other attraction has is that the effects are so, in so many cases, so believable, regardless of age,
Mm,
that you get a new question to ponder as you go through the ride, which isn't necessarily like, am I going to make it out of here and are these ghosts going to get me? The question is, wait, but so how are they doing that? Because I know they're not
Right.
real,
Right. I
but
now, as
there's
an adult, have the understanding that I do not believe
spoiler alert.
that ghosts are real. And maybe you do, but I do, even if you do believe in ghosts, I would argue
Are
that
those ghosts
when
real?
you ride the haunted mansion, you aren't like, okay, I'm an adult, I believe in ghosts, and you know, Leota is getting paid an hourly salary as a ghost. Like I
I
think
certainly
that
hope.
listen, she's got to get ahead somehow.
Ooh,
Oh,
woof.
yeah. But anyway,
Cut that out.
we have the budget to edit this. Well, thanks to viewers like you on Patreon, we
Yeah, thanks
can.
for support from Madame Leota, who's getting paid her hourly.
Her Allery
Right? She's a
salary
patron, right? If you're out there, send us a message from somewhere beyond.
at Madame Leota. There is a universality to the mysticism of the effects. Whether you're a kid and you're like, "Oh my God, that's a real ghost," or an adult
Mhm.
and saying, "How do they do that?" The fact that so many of these effects are so old, the fact that the effects are centuries old and don't largely don't rely on cutting edge technology lends it they're simple.
So many of them, even the complex ones, are at their base level simple. If complex in execution, they are simple in principle.
Yes, and I think the mysticism of the effects is one of those points. I'm pretty sure that was one of our five.
I believe it was.
Is the
I think I would call it the analog nature of the illusions.
Yes, no, okay, so let's talk about the analog nature of the illusions because I just to give a slight story time that people who listening to this podcast already know because I talked about it in episode 1. The illusions are sort of what got me into Imagineering in the first place because I was so enamored with them and because I didn't know how they worked, and as soon as I realized that they were illusions, that they were something that was created, I went from being scared to being fascinated. And so the singing busts were the first illusion I ever made, and I continue to be endlessly
Not
fascinated.
the ones in the ride, by the way.
What?
Well, I mean, the ones in the ride inspired you, but then you made your own at home. Like,
Can you imagine? And then they hired this
listen,
10-year-old.
you were an Imagineer. For all you know, the people out there are thinking, like, wait, did he make the ones in the ride? Like,
I feel very I got a huge chip on my shoulder that the Imagineering Haunted Mansion books always say Yale Gracie, Rolly Crump, and forget Noah Sunday-Lefkowitz.
you're one of the great hidden secrets of the Haunted
God.
Mansion.
Yeah, let's do that. Despite the 50-year
Bigger than the
difference.
Hatbox Ghost. Little
Is
do people know you ghost wrote all the illusions
Oh
for the
my
Haunted
God.
Mansion.
The effects are frustratingly simple and yet so well done that it does harbor questions from the adults as well as kids. There is something universal to that experience of questioning how do you do that? There is an inherent mysticism in that.
Yeah, it's interesting how the Haunted Mansion is like one of the rare examples of something that has both internal, questions you can ask that are like internal to the story, but then also sort of the meta question of like, okay, but wait, like even when I know it's fake, there's still the question of like, but how does it look so good? How does it look so real? How does it look so convincing? And how do I not know? After, think we live in a very technologically literate age. I know it doesn't always seem like that. But generally speaking, more and more people have clear understandings of like how things work. And certainly we live in the information age where if you want to find out, the answers are more accessible than ever. And yet, you can still ride through the Haunted Mansion. One, as someone who doesn't necessarily, if you don't know, if it hasn't been spoiled, you can ride through and say, I'm just not sure what they're doing. You still get people looking at the ballroom and saying, like, I don't know, holograms, like,
Right,
right, something like
the
that.
fact that the attraction has been open for over 50 years and we are at a point technologically where they finally maybe could be holograms,
Right.
and yet people have been saying that from day one, and so much easier than that. Like they're
Yeah.
that's fascinating. And you brought up the meta narrative question. That's so unique to this experience, with exceptions, because there are illusions built into the fabric of themed entertainment experiences.
Right. Other
You know,
rides have magic tricks,
right? But
but
this is the cornerstone of theme park magic. I mean, they really pull out all the stops, and
yeah.
they show you ghosts in different ways, where just as you think you know how one type of ghost is done, they show you a different type of ghost.
Right.
You
And
know,
they
they're
let you get closer, or they let you, you have sort of a very dynamic experience of them. Sometimes they're far away, sometimes they're very close, sometimes they're very transparent, sometimes they feel more corporeal. And you never quite get to decide like, they must be doing this, you know? It
right.
feels like they show you every single side of the thing, and while that's not actually quite what they're doing, you feel like if there were a logical answer, if it were simple, I would have figured it out by now. And so your brain thinks forward. You tend to think like, well, what's the cutting edge thing that they could be doing? When actually it's like they went the other direction. They went back 100 years and were inspired by that. So then it also has the vibe of like a Victorian magic show, which, is rooted in the time period that the ride is designed to emulate. So it's got,
There is a
that sort of
whole
component too.
metatextual thing where the
Yeah,
time and place that the illusions were created is sort of, in a broader sense, the time and place that the mansion canonically takes place in, depending
mhm,
on which mansion you're in. But
sure.
that lends to the believability of the effects, because the effects can exist in both narratives. It can exist
Hmm.
within the story of the mansion and the meta textual story of, we're living in this themed world. Even the illusions they are largely pulling from could have existed at the time that the story that is being told exists.
With some exceptions, but usually only things that have been added since opening.
Right. And even
And
the
even some of those walk the line really well, but some of them, of
right,
course,
even the
feel a little
idea
more
of a
digital.
projected face, like you could do that with lanterns. You could do that in an analog fashion. It's just we are now doing them with a digital component, but in most cases in the mansion, the digital component is hidden well enough that we don't look at it and say, "Oh, that's a digital effect."
Right.
I don't
Madame
think
Leota does not scan as a digital effect.
right.
She's also still very much a practical effect in so
Right,
many
she is in
senses.
physical space. We can
Mhm.
see her. There's a lot of you. Madame Leota is actually a great example of an effect we see almost from 360 angles,
Right.
which I don't think people talk about how impressive that is. And it happened when she was front projected, and it happens now when she's rear projected. In both cases, that's extremely impressive. And
Yes.
like you don't look at that and think, "Oh, that's a digital effect." You don't look at the singing busts and think, "Oh, that's a
Spoiler effect,
digital
it's
effect."
it's a digital effect. We're giving this away. I
I
hope I
I
hope if
hope
you're listening to this,
anybody
you
who's
probably
listening
know
to this
already, but
this podcast knows the like general consensus of the Haunted
let's not give
Mansion.
away the ballroom just in case.
Oh man, I literally that was the first thing I learned when I was 11. But I
Right.
I hope I well also actually, speaking of this, that that speaks to something that I've seen people say, where people don't want the magic to be spoiled. People are like, "Oh, don't show
Right.
me the Haunted Mansion with the lights on." I know
Hmm.
that we exist in this other universe where no, no,
Like,
no,
oh,
no, no.
you could not show
Please.
me enough of that. You could let me in there with a magnifying glass, and I'd be like, "Do you have a stronger one? Like,
Because it's
I want to
so
see more."
effective, and that just peeking behind the curtain it creates even more fascination, because everything is so effective. You want to know what set of circumstances have they developed in this attraction that allows these things to be as effective as they are.
Right.
Even down to the simple effects, like the bookcases in the library in Florida are largely flats. They're just
Right.
flat, and
The
it's
light
like
turns on, and it's like, oh, there are like 15 books in here.
that's not even technically an illusion. it's just so well done. And
Yeah.
that's well done whether you're 10 or 90. You're like, those, that looks like books.
Something that just occurred to me now is that part of what's interesting, we were saying before about how like the question that changes, the question of like where your interest is and like what is most compelling about the attraction to you has the potential to evolve as you get older. But in a way it doesn't, because in either case, either as a small child or as an adult who's not necessarily believing that the ghosts are real, but is wondering what's going on in there and how things are done, you could sum them both up by asking the question, so what's going on in the shadows? Like what
Mm.
lurks in the darkness here? And what, like, that is kind of, a little bit what you wonder
Well,
as a
the
child.
mansion is a masterclass in only showing you just enough. Just
Yeah,
the amount of scarcity that they play with is also just something that's
right,
incredibly effective. Like they, you feel like you're in a house, and yet if you turn around in the doom buggy, that's a black flat behind you.
right.
You are given just enough to let your imagination run wild, even without a sexy effect in front of you. You know, you go down and you see the endless hallway, you see the corridor of doors. There's nothing, you're not like, "Oh, how are they doing that? It's a door knocker." But
Right.
your mind,
You don't think about the mechanics on the other side of that. Your brain projects something else, a
right.
situation.
And it leads you to let your brain wander because it's almost frustratingly simple. Again, with the effects and just the general ambiance of the each room. You know, it lets you wonder like why can I only see a quarter of this room? What's going on in the rest of the room that I can't
Right.
see?
Well, and even the Doom buggies, have the brilliant feature of like looking behind you is not something you can do easily. Of course, I'm sure we have both done it at times just to see what we want to see. But it is designed one to sort of like isolate you from the other vehicles, which helps create the impression that you're alone, but it also directs you specifically where they want you to look.
And it doesn't even feel like it. That's what's so
No,
impressive to me
it
is
feels very natural.
I never feel like I'm wearing horse blinders.
Right.
And yet
That's essentially what it is. It's a big horse blinder.
and yet it works. You know, I don't feel like I am being told not to look anywhere, which is one
No.
of the brilliance of the magic tricks. Is you don't realize that your attention is being purposely diverted from one area to another
And not only that, but everywhere you're being permitted to look,
is so rich.
for the most part, is so rich. Exactly. Where, I mean, there are places where they, strategically drown you in the darkness. And I love when that happens. But then almost immediately after,
If you
yeah,
either one of them is done intentionally, you know,
yeah.
when you are being given darkness, that is for a specific story or emotional beat. You know, that
And it's
is
always, oh, I'm sorry.
no, that I was going to start
Oh,
a
I
sentence.
just
I
didn't mean
didn't
to
know
cut you
where it
off.
would go.
Well, I was just going to say it's always in between a very elaborate moment as well. You come into the foyer, it's beautifully appointed. In Disneyland's case in particular, it feels like a very genuine room. In Disney World, there's a show element that you're taking in, and it's very dark, but you can tell there's wood carvings all around the room. There's wainscoting, there's wallpaper, there's an opulent chandelier. And then you go into the stretching room, and that's very large and imposing and has all these elements. And then you get dropped into the darkness there. But you know that the darkness is not to conceal that, there's nothing really actually going on. There's plenty going on. And you've been looking at it for, a full minute now in this room. It's used strategically for, as a scare, but also then even later when there are scenes where I mean, the load area in Disneyland is an example where there's not as much to see, and in some cases the lights may be too bright these days, but that darkness when bookended by the changing portrait hall and then the endless hallway ahead of it in the ride, you don't feel necessarily shortchanged. You just it's a tonal disruption, and it sort of heightens the mystery of like, so what's in this darkness that I'm now getting into a ride vehicle and being escorted into, if you don't know what's ahead, you still feel very comfortable that it's like, but they're not cheaping out here. Everything I've seen so far already is like lush and beautiful and fully realized to a degree that like everything is so elaborate that the
Well,
darkness feels strategic.
and to continue that point, you're talking about how elaborate the wainscoting and the wallpaper is in the first room or two. That primes your brain to say,
Mhm.
"Oh my gosh, I was in this room, this intimate room that I can feel the crown molding. I can see the wallpaper." So that throughout the rest of the attraction, your brain automatically assumes that the rest of the quote unquote house within
Mhm.
the story has that level of detail. Where
Right.
in reality, they have just primed you by showing you this in two or three examples, and then they let your brain do the rest of the work. That
Mhm.
from then on, your brain fills in. Oh well, the wainscoting must be elaborate in every room. There must be these giant carved wooden doors. You no longer have your focus pulled to the fact that that heavy wooden door is really just a flat painted piece
Right.
of plywood, because you have already accepted something from the previous
Yeah,
scenes.
you've been convinced.
And it's just, oh my God. And I think so much of that goes back to the old analog nature of illusions and the old rules of old magic.
Yeah, they establish very firmly, okay, so here are the bounds of our reality. We're putting the cards on the table. We're letting you see this is real. You can feel it, you can smell it, you can touch it. Please step away from the walls, but like, but you could touch them. You get enough, FaceTime with them, you're close enough that you're like, yeah, but I know they're real, which then makes it all the more amazing when you see the stretch room do its thing because you're like, now wait a second, I touched that wall a second ago, and I'm not
Right.
supposed to touch it now, but like a wall that I touched is doing something that a wall that I've never had a wall that I touched do something like that before.
Well, I remember when I was a kid being confounded by the stretching room, not because it stretched, but because I do remember walking into the stretching room. And yet, when he says there are no windows and no doors, when you look around, there are no windows and no doors.
You're like, wait a second, but there was because how did I get in here? And how do you not notice it closing? Because now at Disney World, since 2007, they have a sound effect when the door shuts. But prior to that, it was so like whisper quiet that you
Hmm.
really kind of I think a lot of people genuinely just didn't notice that the wall slid back shut after you. And therefore, when he finally brings it up, you're like, hey, wait a second. Yeah, like we and because all the walls look the same, you're like, I'm actually not 100% certain which wall we came through.
And that's actually a game I like to play with myself. I know there are two stretching rooms in each mansion, but
Spoiler alert.
I try not to pay attention to which one I go into, because I like being unaware of which wall is going to open up. I like sort of giving myself into that experience. And at a certain point you do just sort of lose that by the nature of being so intimately familiar with the
Right.
attraction.
Well, and because when the stretch room is so full that you look and you're like, oh, I don't want to have to wait behind these other 40 people. Like sometimes you naturally gravitate towards where
Oh,
the
that's
door is
so
going to
funny,
be.
because even when I'm with a large group, I like to hang back for the possibility that I might get a few doom buggies ahead or behind me
That's true.
all to myself.
I will sometimes head to the corner where I know the door to be and then power walk. I won't run,
That's
but
really
power
funny.
walk to the doom buggies. And usually that will put some space between me and the other people. But then I'm at the head of the group and I'm not waiting, in an extra crowd for no reason.
I do want to talk about, we mentioned it a bit, but how the Haunted Mansion is, I would argue, one of the most effective versions of the very universal experience of the haunted house experience.
He did air quotes, by the way, for everyone listening at home.
The haunted house
Yes,
experience.
in quotes. But like you're right.
I say that. I don't know if I have anything to add to, other than I do think
Other
it
than it's just true.
I do think it is, because mostly, other than the reasons we've already spoken about, is that it's such a slow burn.
Which, like, what a delicious slow burn. Like, because some rides just drop you right in, and oh, okay, it's crazy from the word go. And this one, they really like they just extend the dread as long as possible. That's part of what's nice about Walt Disney World. They extended it even further from
Which is
Disneyland's
why
into
I
like,
will die on the hill that Walt Disney World's is my favorite because of those extra like 2 minutes of show scenes. I just love being engrossed in the first third of the attraction. I love being engrossed in the unknowing of
mhm,
the first third before the rules have been set, before the reveal of, oh, the ghosts are fun. I like that
right.
extended trepidation feeling.
Well, part of what I think is nice about that too is like when you're going through for the first time, you don't really know if you're actually even gonna see a ghost. But then not only are you going in with the question of like, are we gonna see ghosts and what are they like and are they nice and will I be scared if I do see one? Like maybe they will come out eventually. But then also you do finally see them and they are revealed in the most like,
Splendor.
yeah, and so many of them. And then they just keep coming. You get to the graveyard and it's an embarrassment of riches. And I would say that is part of why it's one of the best haunted houses ever because it it offers you everything you could want from a haunted house all in one place. If you're and that's both if you're talking about like, hey, there's that creepy old house at the end of the street, we want to sneak in there one night and just like see, maybe there's a ghost in there and you and your friends go, to find out what's in that old, house on the hill, but also as a themed attraction, because a haunted house is an institution in, amusement and theme parks. What other one can you think of where you get such like a delicious amount of time spent with the question of will they or won't they appear? And then
Right.
also, when they finally do, you see more ghosts there than you'll ever see anywhere in your life, real or fake. Like that is, it's just, they give you both in a top drawer, serving.
Well, I think what you just said touches on something so real, which is I want to see ghosts, but what I really want is the feeling of wanting to see ghosts. Because if I get on the doom buggy and you immediately show me a ghost, I go, "Okay, there you go.
Yeah,
There's the
there they
ghost."
are. Got it.
But
Yeah,
the
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 tension goes out a little
the
bit.
prolonging of the tension, the prolonging of, "Oh, I haven't seen a ghost yet. What's going to happen?"
Yeah,
And
and like we're
that's
4 minutes into this ride, and I still haven't like I
I've
still don't know
seen
what's coming.
otherworldly things happen, like the doors
Mhm.
knocking and the endless hallway, but we haven't seen a ghost. It prolongs the question. And I think that could be a misinterpretation of like somebody making a haunted house of, oh, you want to see ghosts? I'm going to give you so many ghosts from the jump.
Yeah,
That it's
quick.
no, it's the fact that it keeps the anticipation building and it keeps the desire for ghosts coming.
And then like has the unenviable task of needing to deliver the goods that
Sure.
like you've then had that you've been teased for so long that finally they do have to reveal them, but then you look and you're like, I can't believe what I'm seeing. Like the ballroom in particular, I always say the ballroom is the best scene in the Haunted Mansion, possibly the best scene of anything anywhere. And you could look for years and just still, if unless you know the principle of how it's done, you know, precisely, you can still be mystified of like, but it's just this is the most realistic looking collection of ghosts I could fathom, and I'm staring at them directly and I'm looking straight down through them, and it's still like it just doesn't give it up. Because the other thing too is like, for as simple as the premise is of that illusion, it is executed at such scale, such massive scale, that even if you were told like, oh, this is the premise, you still kind of wonder like, but how can you do it that big
Right.
though?
How'd you get said thing into this building at
Thank you
this
for not
scale?
spoiling it. I think we all know, but just in
I was gonna
case,
say, yeah.
just in case you're the one guy.
Is anybody listening to this podcast and doesn't know how Pepper's Ghost works? Because we've said the phrase Pepper's Ghost before in this podcast. We haven't yet explained what Pepper's Ghost is. Are there anything else? I wanted to bring up briefly the fact that I think the Haunted Mansion is a very accessible experience because it's within the context of Disney. It's in the context of Disneyland. It's in the context of
Sure.
Disney World. So kids can go on it or parents can take their kids on it with the assumed understanding that they will be okay because it's Disney. And that
Unless you're me, because 4-year-old me, I made no such assumptions. I was like, listen, I love the rest of this
maybe
place.
your parents. I don't think that you're consciously thinking about that as a child, but I do
No, but
think
that's what I mean. Yeah, no, they were like, "Oh yeah, you'll be fine." And I was like, I don't know if you've noticed, there are ghosts here. So like, you telling me we're fine, that doesn't pass.
well
I
that's
I know what I'm seeing. Like,
I will say that this thought is what got me on Tower of Terror for the first time as a
oh,
teenager because
interesting.
I was very scared of Tower of Terror as a preteen, and what eventually got me on it was the logic of, well, it's in a Disney park. It can't
Yeah,
be
how
that
I'm gonna
terrifying.
survive, right? Like,
And that was enough to get me on it, and now it's one of my favorite attractions, both from thrill and from theme. And
right. Yeah,
eventually,
because
I'm
that's another
sure,
one.
yeah,
It's
that's another
so
spooky. It's
that's its own
another
episode. We'll talk about that some other time.
Tower of Terror is a bit of a spiritual successor to the Haunted Mansion by the
Sure.
way it unravels and tells a story and makes use of illusions that I kind of want to talk about
The
the
relationship.
the legacy of the Haunted Mansion in that regard of clearly this thing still works. And we've been talking about
Right.
why the Haunted Mansion works. To wrap it up here, I want to propose the question to you. All of this being said that we've talked about, why do you think the Haunted Mansion still works in today? We've obviously talked, we've already spoken to this, but just as a
But
con-
just to sum it up,
to sum it up, why do you think that people like you and me are currently on a podcast talking about it? Why do you think, we've made, I'll use the word career lightly for myself, but for you, certainly careers of drawing inspiration from and recreating illusions from and trying to prolong and extend the experience of the Haunted Mansion. Why do you think that that affects us and the audience so deeply still to this day, other than everything we've talked about?
right? Yeah, I was like, did I not just tell you that? No, but like, I mean, it is a gift that keeps on giving. It's one of those things like it's sweetens with age. I don't know, what does wine do with age? It does that. Um, it's got, notes all over the scale, emotionally, visually,
Grammatically.
economically,
Oh,
grammatically.
there we
Thank
go.
you.
Okay, I was wondering
You
which
cut
one of
me
us was
off.
gonna get to the
You
joke. I
cut
apologize.
me
It
off.
wasn't me.
God.
It was the Zoom delay.
Right, right, sure, sure. Technology. See, but it does. I wonder how much it really is true that, like, in an age where we are confronted so frequently with technology, that, like, I mean, I won't pretend that there's no technology in the Haunted Mansion, and I won't pretend that even the old effects aren't, they can be called technology, but we are presented with so much digital technology, um, that I think actually culturally we have a growing appetite for things that do not use that. And I think that's part of what creates the sensation of an otherworldly experience, is that we're seeing things that we know are, for the most part, not being achieved digitally. You can sense when something is being done digitally, and I think there's a part of our brain that shuts off a little bit when we see that, because we're so used to our phones, we're so used to our computers, we're so used to our TVs, and obviously we can be entertained by those things, but when you see something that visually just like does not have any apparent relation to anything in your world as you experience it day to day, that lights up a part of your brain that nothing else does. You know, you just look and think like, I'm I can't fathom what I'm experiencing. And in a world where information is more accessible than ever, where we all kind of like feel like we know more than ever before, when you see something that you just can't comprehend, it feeds into sort of our human desire for mystery, our human desire for understanding, our curiosity. Um, and it continues to elude us. And even when you have people like us who, have seen the behind the scenes photos and have read the books and know how the effects are done, the fact that they still hold up when you encounter
Yes.
them, like even knowing how it's done to such a degree, to such a level, with such ambition, with such scale, that it's still dazzling, even if it's no longer mystifying.
Well, yes, it is totally that feeling of knowing how it works just enhances it because of how effective it is regardless.
Yeah.
You know, it is really just it is the gift that keeps on giving.
They really built a feast with that ride. They were like, "Oh, you want it all? We got it all. It's all here.
And that
You
was the original slogan, you know.
you want it? We got it. It's all here at the Haunted Mansion."
Well,
Opening August 9th, 1969,
that's very good.
or August 12th, depending on how seriously you take your history.
Wow. All right. Well, with that, that's about where the this conversation ends.
Because otherwise, we're going to be talking for the next 19 hours and still have to do a part two.
And we have and we will. But for now, Brandon, where can everybody find and support you in your
Oh,
love for the Haunted Mansion and
well,
otherwise?
if you like seeing the process of spooky projects being made, you can head over to my Patreon, where I'm doing long form video tutorials in my semi Haunted Mansion inspired video series Out of the Ether with Brandon Hardy.
He did jazz hands.
I did do jazz hands, but they were like sort of, it was almost more of like a spirit finger thing, because,
Spirit fingers, like literally, because it's spirit. That's very
thank
good,
you. Yeah,
Brandon. That's
I
the
mean,
level of that's the quality content you can expect from Out of the Ether with Brandon Hardy on
along
Patreon.
with some other things, I really hope. Um, but that's part of it. And then also, of course, I'm on Instagram and TikTok at brandon.hardy.art.
I'm glad you said that because I didn't know there were dots.
There are dots. I think technically you don't have to type the dots and it still probably shows up. If you're having a hard time, just Google Brandon Hardy Art and I seem to come up.
Well, thank you for talking about our mutual favorite topic. We will be
Goodness,
we
thank
I
you.
will certainly have you back here. We have a running list of Patreon podcast topics to talk about, but you're gonna have to subscribe to my Patreon if you want to hear them. So,
Oh, I already have.
that's true,
And let me
Brandon.
tell you, it is worth the money.
Bra-
I say to all the people who are listening right now who also are already subscribing, we're preaching to the choir. This is what this is.
well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you. Brandon and I have been
I will affirm to anyone who's questioning, like,
we have
was
been
this a good investment? It
subscribers to
was,
each other's podcasts for years now. But
you know?
until next time, thank you for being on Medlin Around, and we
I
will.
like how you almost said something else.
Well, Brandon, yes, I have edited out of the other episodes, but every other episode I've called it meddling along, and I've sent it to Brandon to review, and he's been like, "You said meddling along."
It's like either you change the title or you need to change the title because you're not always. But growing pains.
I'm sticking to my guns. This is meddling around with Noah Sunday-Lefkowitz featuring Brandon Hardy. I hope you
Thank
enjoyed
you.
talking about the Haunted Mansion, and I will see you next time. I'm not at my piano, so I'm just gonna go ba ba da da ba 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 ba. We did it.